and welcome to another edition of Money Matters Monday. My name is Josh Middleton. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Granite Falls School District, and we are on another episode today in a series of podcasts that is examining school finance in the state of Washington. And today I am joined once again by our Director of Finance and Operations, Marshall Kruse. Marshall, welcome.
Good morning, Josh. Glad to be here again.
Yeah, glad we're here. We've got a big topic today, Marshall. We're talking about the world of levies and bonds. And I think there's some school finance classes that take a whole semester talking about just levies and bonds, but we're going to try and do something in 15 to 20 minutes. Does that sound all right?
I think we can do it.
Okay, let's dig in. So, let's just start at the real basic level, and that is, can you do a quick compare and contrast of bonds and levies?
Sure. Levies and bonds are a way for school districts to raise additional money to help pay for things that the state doesn't pay for. Levies are much shorter term and a smaller amount, and they have strict rules about what they can be used for. Bonds are a bigger dollar value that are spread out over a longer period of time. A good little saying that we like to use is that levies are for learning and bonds are for building, because bonds are really for the big ticket items like a new school or a remodel of an existing school, and levies are for the additional money to run your day-to-day operations.
So that sort of segues nicely into, I think we're more familiar with levies because we hear about them more often. We're familiar with them. We vote on them much more often than a bond. What are the different types of levies, and what levies does Granite Falls School District have?
So just to back up for half a second here, almost every school district in the state of Washington has a levy, and their levies are essentially continuous and are necessary to run their day-to-day operations. Not every school district has a bond. Bonds are much more less common. So going back to levies, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Well, we're just looking at, we're more familiar with bonds, right, with levies. What are the levies that we have?
Yeah, we have two levies. We have a capital projects levy, and we have a maintenance and operations levy. Our maintenance and operations levy feeds revenue into our general fund and can be used for anything that enhances what the state calls a prototypical school funding model. So it could be having additional teachers. It could be having sports because the state doesn't pay for sports. It could be transportation. It can be extra costs for programs that aren't covered by the state. So that's what the maintenance and operations levy is for. And then the capital projects levy is to purchase technology for students and staff, such as Chromebooks, projectors, laptops, flat panel devices, stuff like that, or small capital improvements. Like if we have a boiler go out, we can replace that using our capital projects. But those are really small buckets of money.
And so I think one way of looking at it is we've talked about the general fund, and we get so many dollars from the state. Levies really supplement that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
They allow us to, the state calls it supplement. I think everybody would think these are basic operations that are needed for the school district, like busing. The state doesn't give us enough money for busing, so our levy helps pay for that. Paraeducators, the state doesn't give us enough money for paraeducators, so the levy helps pay for that. Nursing, state, we've talked about this in a past podcast, the state gives us about half a nurse. Well, the levy pays for the additional amount.
That's a great point. And you just referenced something that if we have a new viewer today to Money Matters Monday, go back and look at some of our previous podcasts, because we talked specifically about the prototypical funding model and how that is sort of outdated. And at one time, they levies truly were supplementing our programs, but now we're really reliant on them just for our day-to-day operations. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. Yeah, we would not be able to function. No school district in the state of Washington will be able to function without the help of their levies.
So in terms of our levies, they're voted on by qualified electors in the district. How often are our levies elections, and what does it take in terms of voting for a levy to pass?
We choose to ask our voters to renew our levies every 4 years. You don't have to be every 4 years. It could be 3 years. We choose 4 years. It takes 50% plus one. So all the votes are counted. Yeses and nos. We have to have one more yes than we have no, and we pass our levies.
Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit into the world of bonds. You mentioned levies are for learning and bonds are for building. Let's talk about bonds for a moment and take that definition out a bit further. What do you mean bonds are for buildings?
So the state provides very minimal help if a school district needs to has growth in their community and needs to expand a building or build a new school because of people moving into their community, or they need to replace an entire roof on a school, entire HVAC system. The state doesn't provide funding for that. So if the school district needs to expand a school, add a wing, build a new school, purchase land, any of those things, we have to ask our taxpayers to help contribute via a bond. And those are typically very high dollar amounts. They're spread out over 20 years to minimize the impact on the voter.
So I want to talk a little bit about some projects just to help differentiate. So we had a building a few years ago, our multi-purpose room that needed a new roof. But that's a smaller building, and I believe that ticket price was about $45,000. It was very, very reasonable, but it's a smaller building. That we were able to pay out of what levy or what bucket of money?
We paid that out of our capital projects, raised by our capital projects levy, because that's a small capital improvement, replacing a roof for a small building. We levy we have $750,000 in our capital projects levy fund to work with over the year for one school year. We split it up. About half of it goes to technology for students, staff, and classrooms. The other half goes to those kind of emergency projects that might come along during the school year.
I'm going to contrast that with from my own past in a different district in Montana. We lost the roof of a high school and a decent size, and it was much more than $43,000. It was more in the $1 million range, and of course we had to do a bond for that and some other projects. So let's talk about our district. What bonds do we have, and what's that impact on our taxpayers?
Sure, we have 3 bonds right now. We took out two bonds to do the improvements we did 5 years ago when we improved the STEAM building at the middle school. We added the locker rooms and the extra seating to the stadium at the high school. And then we did security upgrades and improvements throughout the district. So that we asked the voters to approve almost $12 million for that. And we broke that out into 2 bonds. And then we have a bond still on our books for the building of the new high school that is now somewhere around 15 or 16 years old. And so that was being paid off over 20 years.
Okay.
And the other ones they vary between 10 and 20-year payoffs, the 3 bonds that we have.
So we have one dropping off. What does that mean for our taxpayer?
So the high school bond drops off next year. So that would be the bond portion of the tax for district member would drop off by about 50%. So
Okay.
probably 60 cents is what it would drop
Okay.
per. And the way the tax rate's worth is if we say 60 cents, we make 60 cents per every $1,000 of assessed value of that property.
Okay, that's right. And so really that's some good news for our taxpayers for the short term. Obviously, we have some needs. We have just some wear and tear of our facilities. We did a full facility master plan. And our demographic study shows we're going to be growing. So, at some point in the future, I could see our board saying, you know what, let's go to the community again. We're not near that point right now, but there'll be a day when Granite Falls will go back to that. But in the meantime, once that bond drops off, so be it. But let's just talk about a bond. If there were a project that not covered by the capital levy, so we would certainly, it's a bigger project, we would need a bond. What's needed in terms of that percentage or in the approval by our voters?
Right. The rules in Washington State, and these rules vary throughout all the states. Every state has a little bit different rules for what it takes to pass a bond. In Washington State, it's 60% plus one. So after everybody votes, the yeses have to be 60% plus one, and the noes have to be 40% minus one in order to pass. So it's a much higher threshold of to pass a bond than it is to pass a levy.
And let's just talk about the elections from this last week. And I believe they're still counting. I think we're still, or have they become finalized yet? I'm not sure. But we have a pretty good sense of levies and bonds that were on that February 13th ballot. We didn't have anything, but a lot of our neighbors did.
Right.
What were some of the trends that you saw, and what conclusions do you come away with?
So there were a ton of levies on this last ballot statewide, and of the ton of levies, the bulk of them passed. Probably somewhere around 90% of them passed. Communities are really supportive of school districts with the levies. They're not as big an impact on the tax bill, and it's very easy to show that levies are necessary to function in the day-to-day operations of a school district. Bonds, on the other hand, have been having a really hard time passing. Part of that is the 60% plus one threshold. Part of that is the dollar amounts that people ask for. In the state of Washington, this last ballot had 21 bonds on it, and I think 7 were passing, which is actually a higher percentage than we've been seeing over the last 5 years. A third of them passing is, you'd like to see more passing, but a third is better than, I don't think any have passed the 2 or 3 years prior to that.
I was going to say, I don't think we've seen a passage of a bond in our state for a number of years, and a variety of factors involved with that. But to have about a third of them pass just recently, that is good news.
And in our region, Edmonds ran a very big bond, and it passed with like 65% approval. Arlington ran a bond that did not pass, and Sultan ran a bond that did not pass.
Okay. Well, good news for the levies, generally,
Yeah.
And certainly some improvement for our bonds in this last election cycle. And certainly there'll be more that are coming up, especially in November of 24. I think we'll see a number of other districts throughout the state test the waters for bonds for their district. So, Marshall, I'm hopeful that our viewers will send in some questions, because we certainly want to come back. And honestly, the questions can be about bonds and levies. They can be about general fund. They can be about the prototypical funding model.
It could be about why there's no bagel places in Snohomish County, because I'd like to address that question.
Well, I would like that as well. And that's been a perplexing question for years that we have to go out of county for a good bagel. But for our viewers, we really do want to hear from you, and we will jump back on and do another podcast addressing school finance on our Money Matters Mondays. And Marshall, again, I want to thank you for your expertise in school finance and helping our viewers understand a bit more of how a very complex system in finance works in providing quality education. Ultimately, it's about that. It's about the quality education that we provide for our students and their future opportunities. So thank you again for joining. And we just want to thank our viewers and hope you have a great rest of the day. And again, please send in your questions and we'll hop back on.
Well, thanks for hosting this.
All right. Thank you, everyone.